This year's Word on the Street Arts Festival is not quite the same as the last 5 years have brought, but we'll see our word off the street working just as well. I'm Jonathan McCall, and I welcome you to one of my historical street walks around Dingwall, this time without worrying about the weather. The Dingwall Community Development Company was set up in 2018 as a response to the complaint that someone should do something about the state of the town. If you're interested in what we're up to, mentions are beginning to appear on the Community Council and Dingwall Notice Board Facebook pages. We're starting with small projects, but these should grow as our finances and reach grow. The first to get off the ground, or at least taxi to the start of the runway, is the Dingwall Heritage Trail. This is being designed to offer a context to some pleasant walks around the borough, what the significance is of what you see as a local or a visitor. Initially, we're planning a dozen notice boards with a summary of some of the history at each point. We are seeking funding from local interests and the Heritage Lottery Fund, but as you can imagine, the COVID-19 restrictions have slowed all of this down. As well as to local historians such as the Dingwall Museum and Dingwall History Society, we are reaching out to academy students and organisations like the NHS and Abellio for copy and permissions to cite notice boards. We intend to add QR codes, those 2D barcodes that when scanned by your smartphone will find you more about what you're reading and seeing. And we have to start somewhere. Welcome to the start of the Dingwall Heritage Trail. The first board should be positioned about here at the entrance to Castle Street, where we're standing at the crossroads of the oldest roads in Dingwall. From here we can head north to the castle and the canal, south to the Green Hill, east to the ferry point where the Vikings landed, or west to the High Street, a dwelling place for over 1,000 years, and the land route to the west. What's your pleasure? Look north, and closer to us than the Castle Street Church of Scotland, we see on our left Castlebank House, in the name of which we are reminded of both Dingwall Castle and Hugh Innes, a 19th century provost and imprisoned banker. The land all along the left was once the stable croft supporting Dingwall Castle's stabled horses and hostlers, and out of our view at the top the modern house, well, 200 years old modern, built from the leftover bones of that building from which the Earls of Ross held sway over huge territories managed from here in the 13th to 15th centuries. Once where we stand was the Market Cross, and a marker raised for it, perhaps in the 1220s, is now in the museum front window. Walk north along Castle Street and we pass several of the places of worship and manses past and present of the churches in Dingwall, the Kirk, Episcopalian, Catholic, Free. Halfway up we meet this fragment of the original 13th century castle that fell into disuse in the late 1400s and was finally decommissioned in the 1620s, I assume when James VI and first died. This piece is nicknamed Bishop Andros Ducat after a 16th century churchman, and if you look inside you'll see the pigeonholes. It was probably built using castle stonework rather than being a surviving fragment of the building. At the top of the road, a cul-de-sac for cars, but not for wee walkers, we tread the path around the wall that frames Castle House that was being built by Captain Donald MacLennan 200 years ago out of the stones left over from the collapsed and ruined Dingwall Castle. This is it new, and here it is today with far more mature trees around it. Many of the castle's stones are in use in the other houses of the borough too. Dingwall Castle had grown out of a probable Norse stronghold that perhaps had replaced a Pictish one at this strategic point, commanding access from the sheltered harbour of the Cromarty Firth into the river systems and valleys that led west along the Strathpeffer and Strathconnan. The Earls of Ross held sway here from the 13th to the 15th centuries, semi-policing the north for the Kings of Scots, but with such valuable lands under their control that the Lords of the Isles envied. They tried conquest in 1411 that didn't work, but marriage did later on. Turn around and we reach the railway crossing. This unprepossessing triangle marks the point to choose our next move at the junction of two major communication systems, the railway line from south to north and the canal from east to west. The Dingwall Canal straightened and deepened the course of the Peffery, and beyond it you will find the old river road that winds parallel to the old course. It was intended to allow access to somewhere close to the centre of town to offload and load cargoes shipped into the Cromarty Firth, but Telford warned the borough that it would silt up, and it did. From this point we can either head east to the ferry or west into the town. North is only for the trains, with a spur off to take some to the Kyle. This railway bridge put paid to the possibility of using vessels all the way up the canal, but by the time it was built the council had given up dredging the silt anyway. We could head upstream, perhaps disturbing the pair of herons that fishes the entire canal, and probably seeing the moorhens and certainly mallards that live here. But we'll come to Petersbridge later. So let's go downstream. The Dingwall Canal was opened not long after Waterloo was fought. It had been dug to carry small traffic from the ferry to overcome the need to offload cargoes on the sands and bring them closer to the town to offload at Petersbridge. The railway came through in the 1860s, and its bridge blocked that access. But Telford's comment that the canal would silt up had long come true, and the Borough Council had finally given up dredging it clear. The railway brought in the trade to replace the sea. On our way here we had passed the modern caravan site, always very busy during the summer, but quieter this year, of course. Then the Victoria Park playing fields of our Scottish Premier League team Ross County. Then the Army Cadets and their shooting range, the waterworks, the new James's footbridge, named for James Blake, and now the ferry point itself, a modern landscaping over old landfill. I don't know what cargo this puffer, Jesmond, not the Vital Spark, had come in with in 1913, but I am so glad that one of the Uckert family, Fred or Albert, photographers, was on hand to take a picture of her. Take time, and perhaps binoculars, to look at the wildlife. Otters are about, ospreys fish in the firth, a curlew likes marching up and down despite most of his fellows being out in the firth, dunlin, redshanks and oyster-catchers galore, Canada and pink-footed geese flying over or landing and grazing. But we'll tear ourselves away and have a look south towards the bridge over the Connon before we head back. If we walk further a few hundred yards or meters down the coast from the ferry park to the curving strand, we'll see the remains of the walkway for the ferry that the Mackenzie family ran across to Alcaig for centuries. This picture shows Charlie the ferry returning from Alcaig in 1893. Stretching out from the strand where the Norse beached their merchant vessels from Orkney and the servants of the Earls of Ross landed their goods from Leith. But we'll head straight back up the straight road, once called the Broadpool, to the town, following the echo of all of their footsteps. We pass along the south edge of the long croft that once fed the castle and later private owners, including Andrew Robertson, an 18th century provost whose daughter was William Gladstone's mother. Now it's the waterworks and the Army and Air Force cadets until we get to the hospital. This was built in the days when hospitals were charities, and this was set up by the widow of Dr. William Ross, a long-time physician in Dingwall. She provided £500 to build the hospital as a permanent memorial to him. At first there were local objections from those who thought it would be used to provide bodies for anatomical dissection, but it was soon realized that the patients did survive. More support came from William Gladstone's elder brother Sir Thomas, who added a dispensary, and the Wester Ross Farmers Club paid for an extension in memory of Provost David Ross, no relation, in 1895. Wester Ross in this context stretches from the Black Isle to the west coast. Tain was Easter Ross, Dingwall was Wester. Here we are at the base of one end of the bridge over the railway. Attached to the back of the Sheriff Court, now a private home, we see the first of the four squat towers that framed the prison, now a car park and flats, and beyond is the headquarters of our own Scottish Premier League football team, Ross County, that has developed from the smaller teams that played around the town and came together in the 1920s. The Global Energy Stadium South seating is called the Jail End for a reason we now know. Ross County's ancestor clubs have provided expertise overseas. Lewis Suter of the Ross-Shire County Football Club started one in British Guiana, now Guyana, and Colin Bain Calder started one for his railway colleagues in Argentina that is still going strong as Rosario Central, and there are roads named after Calder over there. Turn around and head over the railway bridge to look at the High Street again. This is just a reminder of where we've been, travelling the circle from the welcome board at the hotel crossroads, up to and along the canal to the ferry point, and back up to the railway. Over the railway bridge, turn left at the other end to approach the railway station. You're circling the Assay Memorial to our area's soldiers of the Seaforth Highlanders who died in the Boer Wars. The Assay elephant being the symbol of the 78th, the Ross-Shire Buffs, one of those absorbed into the Seaforths, who'd won that battle a century earlier, and you see the tall Cambrai cross raised by the 4th Seaforths in 1917 that was brought back to Dingwall after the war. Also here we see the memorial to John Meikle, a soldier of the 4th Seaforths who died in the Great War and won a VC in so doing. The most recent addition is the Normandy veterans of the 1944 invasion of Europe. And beside us is the railway station building complex itself. From the 1860s to the 1880s, the traffic through this station grew tremendously, carrying passengers and especially freight. The Highlands fed the southern towns and cities, even Edinburgh and London, with fish and meat gathered at Kyle and the sheep mark in Laird, and the drovers coming in from the north and the west with cattle. The Highland Railway expanded the station in 1886, but the borough insisted that they keep the existing ticket booth and build the new station back, allowing a platform much wider than even Perth and Waverley ones. There are 3 finials on the roof, a rose and thistle for the termini of the railway in England and Scotland, and what looks like a crescent moon. I don't think it's a crescent moon. I think it's a nod to the thousands of cattle that were assembled here in the fields around the station and shipped south. In the Great War, the platform's width accommodated the men going to and returning from war, both south to Europe and the rest of the world, and north to Thurso and then Scapa Flow for the Navy, both directions using the Jellicoe Express running for exactly that purpose. By the 1920s, the sidings and the main lines covered many acres, but in the years since then, the water tank opposite the Mallard fell out of use as steam moved to diesel, and the animals went more by road, as did the people in their own cars. But this last is building up again for commuters and holiday makers. And now back to the High Street. On our way to the welcome board at Point Zero, we pass the amazing Freeth Church with the well-tended grave of Dr. Kennedy, one of the major figures in the 1843 disruption. We pass bank buildings, one now a theological college, and the big memorial to the district's losses in the 2 world wars, and the White House of the Robertsons we've been meeting at various points, and the National Hotel, set up by a different Robertson family and expanded for the railway traffic. Where to next? We could head south, down Hill Street by the Royal Guest House built on the site of Gladstone's poorhouse, and up the hill to the cemetery and Hector's Tower, back through the south car park to the townhouse. Okay, head down the Hill Street and climb the switchback route up the Mitchell Hill, named for 19th century provost, to see the modern town cemetery, passing the Drove Road link on the way up. By the 1890s, the parish burial ground had become too full for further use, and the council bought a piece of land up here to continue the service. The biggest memorial is to Major General Sir Hector MacDonald, a Victorian military hero who'd made the jump from other rank to officer and had seen action in Africa and India. He's buried in Edinburgh, but we won the honour of raising this 100-foot tower to his memory. When we finished admiring this from outside, it's been closed to entrance for some years, but we live in hope. And the souvenir cannon and the modern memorials to the people of the area, we'll make our way back down the hill and cross the road into the South Car and Lorry Park. When we get to the backs of the shops, most of the vendors will take us on to back onto the high street, and in front of us is the museum. Or we could have stayed at the crossroads between the hotels, so we could walk up the high street, admiring Joss's design restrictions for the chimneys and metal furniture, see the gated closes into what once were the various private gardens by houses. MacGregor's Close, for example, was where Alexander MacGregor practiced his 18th century coppersmithing for plumbing and the occasional private distilling ventures in the hills around. And his was the land on which Tulloch Street would be built to head north, and that stayed the A9 until the bypass was built in the 1960s. Past the entrance into Church Street, and we see the 1905 frontage of the 1730s town house, seat of the Borough Council for centuries, until all such were subsumed into bigger district and regional councils in the 1970s. And when they moved to Inverness, this became a museum for their activities and the rest of the towns too. Either way we came, we are now at the very town centre. The museum includes what was once Frew's chemist shop, Williamina Frew being the first qualified female pharmacist in Scotland, and now forms the entrance and exit for the museum. We can also see the gated close into the garden, with other exhibits from the wider area history. Rustra from sawfish brought back from the Caribbean by Captain McLennan, who was the chap who rebuilt the Dingwall Castle ruins into the modern castle house. One of the stags that marked the gate to the original Bran Castle grounds, a stone plaque from the old Roberts Bridge at the West End. Had the museum been open, COVID-19 restrictions have made it rather unviable this year, we could have seen the room where the old Borough Council had its business meetings, a reconstruction of the Mill Street Smithy, the military room with its memories of the Seaforth Highlanders and Hector MacDonald, and other recollections in print and in artifact of the last 3/4 of a millennium. And soon another major item is to be added that goes back half a millennium more before that to the Picts. But let us continue our walk. We'll head up the narrow Church Street, noting the large size of some of the stonework in the 18th century terrace of housing, and suddenly realizing that much of it came from the old Dingwall Castle ruin before Captain McLennan could tidy that up. Here we stand by the vets and the church hall and look at the car park. Perhaps not very romantic looking, but just short of 1,000 years ago, the Norse Jarls of Orkney won the Black Isle Battle of Torfness against the Scots, and this added Dingwall into Norse hands. The Vikings had been raiding the coast for 200 years before this, and will have known the importance of Dingwall's position, guarding the entrance to the river valleys to the west coast that they controlled already, sweeping down the sea lanes they used for communication, raiding, and trading. But here on this hillock, higher in those days, they defined their assembly field, their Thingvellir, where each quarter or half year or annually the freemen of the area would meet, hear the law speaker remind them of the laws they were ruled by, and debate the matters of the day. The Jarls eventually lost control of here, and the rule was taken up by the Earls of Ross in their castle built out by the Firth. This plot of land was part of their estate, and after they fell, it gravitated into the hands of the Kintail Mackenzies, whose descendants included the tutor of Kintail, whose sons are buried in the graveyard across from here, and whose grandson was the first Earl of Cromarty, buried under that obelisk, and this land has formed part of the Cromarty estate ever since. How long has there been a place of worship on this site? It may extend back into Norse times, as Thorfinn, Jarl of Orkney, was a Christian, and the annual assembly included a Norse equivalent to the kirking of the Council, when blessings were sought for their deliberations on the Thingmoot Hill. There was certainly one here long before the Reformation, out of which the Isle of St. Clements had grown, footprint has added in this aerial image. That church itself has gone, but the isle is still here, crumbling admittedly, but still here. The church was finally demolished at the turn of the 18th century into the 19th, and this new one has now been here for over 200 years. Designed by the Tullogh estate architects, and the 15th century first bane of that estate has his grave marked in the burial ground and still host to the parish congregation. Our next move takes us past what is still referred to as the Old Academy, this complex of a community hall, ex-library, council offices, primary school. It was replaced as a secondary school in 1939 by the new academy on the side of the hill leading up to Kinnerdy in Tullogh, but that building and all of its extension huts has also been swept away and replaced by an even newer academy at the bottom of the hill. But we'll not go for that far today. We'll just head up Tullogh Street a few yards to rest at Peter's Bridge. Here on the right is where the trade goods could arrive in small vessels up the canal. Here's where a bridge shortcut the journey north. Davison of Tulloch's improving factor Peter, or Patrick, Reed's original bridge was a humpback one here to allow access to the north without needing to walk all the way around the west end to Roberts Bridge. It had other uses, a major one being to let the population of a Tullogh estate planned housing scheme to the north come to the town centre, but that never got off the ground. He made his mark, though, and is now buried in St. Clement's with others of his family, and the Gordons, and the Bains, and Mackenzies, and Kemps, and Robertsons, and the many others. And there we have it, a whistle-stop tour of the centre of what seems at first glance to be a rather unremarkable town that few outside the region have even heard of, unless they follow the SPL, of course. But from here the Picts controlled the area north of their Inverness centre. From here the Vikings ruled their supply and communications base for a time. From here the Earls of Ross held sway until taken over by the Lords of the Isles. From here explorers went out to find the Northwest Passage, and traders sailed the entire globe. From here food for the great cities of Britain was bought and sold. From here soldiers and sailors went to war. Come and have another look.